In the bitter winter of 1943, as the world convulsed in a war of annihilation, a secret pact was forged not in a grand palace, but in the blood-stained snow of a Ukrainian forest. This is not a story of famous generals or decisive battles. It is the forgotten chronicle of the bunker truce. On January 12, near the war-ravaged village of Komzherkovsky, a brutal Soviet offensive had stalled. The German 189th Assault Gun Battalion, led by the weary but resolute Hauptmann Gerhard M., was encircled, low on ammunition, and sheltering in a network of peasant dugouts and bunkers. Opposite them, the Soviet 119th Rifle Battalion, commanded by the hardened Major Ivan S., was equally exhausted, frozen and bled white by days of futile attacks. Both units were trapped in a pocket of hell, cut off from their own lines, their fates hanging by a thread in the sub-zero temperatures. The first crack in the wall of hatred appeared not with a white flag, but with a desperate human sound, the cry of a wounded man. A young German medic, ignoring the risk, crawled into the no-man's land to retrieve a screaming Soviet soldier. He was not shot at. The next day, a Soviet patrol stumbled upon a German field kitchen that had been destroyed by shellfire. Instead of firing, they left a loaf of frozen black bread near the German lines. An unspoken understanding began to crystallize in the frozen air. Then, on the morning of January 17th, a remarkable figure emerged from the Soviet positions. He was not a soldier, but the unit's political commissar, a man named Alexei. Defying his own doctrine and risking execution, he walked slowly, holding a stick with a rag tied to it. He met with Hauptmann Gerhard in the skeletal ruins of a farmhouse. The details of their conversation are lost, but the outcome was staggering. They agreed to a local, temporary truce. Not to surrender, but to survive. For 3 days, from January 17th to the 19th, an eerie silence fell over this small sector of the Eastern Front. The guns stopped. German and Soviet soldiers, who hours before were trying to kill each other, now moved freely in the open. They shared their meager rations, tins of German meat for pots of Soviet buckwheat. They used the same axes to chop firewood from the same frozen trees. Most astonishingly, they established a joint field hospital in the largest bunker, where German medics, with their superior supplies, treated Soviet wounded and Soviet doctors aided Germans. They even held a brief, somber funeral for their dead, burying them in a common grave, the words of a Lutheran prayer and a Russian Orthodox chant mingling in the frosty air. But this fragile island of humanity existed in an ocean of total war. The tension was palpable. Every soldier knew this was an act of treason in the eyes of their high commands. They knew that at any moment, a relief force from either side could break through, shattering the truce and forcing them to once again take up arms against the men with whom they now shared bread and bandages. The suspense was not about an attack, but about the inevitable end of this impossible peace. On January 20th, the sound of distant artillery grew louder. A German relief column was fighting its way closer. The truce was over. Without a word, the soldiers returned to their respective lines. They did not say goodbye. They simply picked up their weapons, turned their backs on one another, and prepared to resume their roles in the grand, bloody narrative of the war. The bunker truce left no mark on military maps. It changed the outcome of no campaign. Its participants likely never spoke of it again. But its significance is profound. It reveals that even in the heart of the most ideological and brutal conflict in human history, the basic instincts of compassion and survival could, for a fleeting moment, overpower the commands of hatred. It forces us to ask a haunting question. Were these men traitors to their causes, or were they, in those 3 frozen days, the only truly sane people on the entire front? The silence of that Ukrainian forest holds the answer.